All right, had to get out of the office to survive outdoors instead of just being in there all the time. But today we are looking at the Zeiss 50mm offerings for the Leica M mount. So the Sonnar and the Planar, however you say it. So we have a 50 f2 and a 50 1.5. And this is actually a lens that I owned for a decent amount of time before trade selling it to move up to the 50 Summilux. And it wasn't for me because of lack of sharpness or any other real big issue outside of one. And the character of this lens is amazing, but it's a lot. So the 50 Planar here is kind of just like a typical Zeiss classic look, where this is a very vintage feeling. It's still sharp and it's not like low contrast, any of that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for a vintage look, this little guy is pretty great. And if you were looking for a more kind of like normal, modern-ish Zeiss rendering, we're looking here. So both lenses I've used a decent amount, especially the Sonnar here. Both great lenses, so let's go take some photos. We're going to be comparing the Zeiss 50mm ZM lenses with my 50mm Summilux. Going to be doing just some like kind of test sample shots here as well. I'm going to try to get in some photos so we can test like what it looks like on a portrait, and we will just compare all the options and see which ones might be best for you in terms of usage, style, and price. So right now we are just under a meter. Here is the 50 f2 Planar lens. Now moving on to the Sonnar. Now what's interesting about this lens is it actually has a minimum focusing distance of that 0.9 meters. So we are at pretty much exactly minimum focusing distance. And since this is kind of like a vintage style lens, we are actually going to turn off our focus peaking. That's about as good as we're going to get. And for our baseline, good old 50 Summilux, which is my favorite lens. Yep. All right. So I will now scoot this back a little bit and we'll get me in the frame and try to see how this works. All right, it should be focused here. We will go for a 12-second timer and see how it goes. Not my best portrait in the world by any means, but we will see at least what it looks like on a person. All right, now we'll do a bit of a bokeh test. So this side doesn't have as much bokeh, but the other side of my house does. So try that out. All right, so this is kind of one of my normal test spaces because it gives me some more interesting out of focus elements. So we're gonna do a little bit of a wide open bokeh test again. And then two of these lenses, I know for a fact, have an interesting issue when stopped down. So we're also gonna stop down some of the lenses and see what kind of happens if you're shooting at like f5.6. So as part of this as well, what I'm gonna do is focus it at almost minimum focusing distance, wide open, and then stop the lens down from there, basically on auto with a 2-second timer, so I'm not gonna be messing with focus, because this little guy has a fairly well-known focus shift issue as you stop down. So we'll see kind of how that works. 1.5, f2, 2.8, f4, 5.6, f8, f11, f16. f2, 2.8, f4, 5.6, f8, f11, f16. .4, f2, 2.8, f4, 5.6, f8, f11, and f16. So one of the big reasons why I moved from the Sonnar to the Summilux is because of that bokeh. It's super, super unique. Unique can be a good thing. Unique can also be a bad thing. I had started to use a 50mm a lot more, so I was doing a lot more 50mm stuff. And the hard edges and just the busyness of the background is really the thing that started to stand out to me, and the reason I decided I'm gonna spend a bunch of money and buy a Summilux. And then the other thing is just that for me, f2 on a 50mm, especially when I was shooting on the M240, was just a really hard focal length to use at f2 because I couldn't really shoot it above like 3200 on ISO, and I try to shoot a lot at more natural light, especially at weddings, and so it just made that whole thing a lot harder, which made me go to the Sonnar because it was relatively inexpensive, and my copy at least seems to be a lot sharper than this one, so who knows what the deal is with that, maybe it's just my memory. But also, I liked the rendering of the original Zeiss Planar lens at f2, didn't like the rendering of the Sonnar for like an everyday, huge, use it for everything lens, and so that's kind of what made me go Summilux there. Now, the 50 Planar, it's kind of just what you look for in a 50mm lens. It's got some character, relatively fast, you can do a lot with it. You also have the ability to go down to 0.7 meters, which is as close as a rangefinder will focus. Another downside to our Sonnar here is that you go down to 0.9 meters, which obviously is almost 3 feet, and you lose out a little bit of that close focus distance. That being said, there's not a lot of lenses out here that give you a vintage look and feel and are still sharp. This lens is, first of all, we all know how much I love a small compact lens, and especially a fast 50. You just don't get that a lot with character and sharpness all together in a very small compact package like this. Obviously it's like a vintage design in terms of optics. Is it going to be my everyday 50mm lens? I decided that it wasn't, but that's not saying that it shouldn't be somebody else's. So I really like the Zeiss offerings. If I wasn't doing this professionally, this is probably the lens I would own. Haven't tried everything out there. Maybe I would own a Summicron. Maybe I would just step it up because I love the Summilux so much. But for the money, you're getting just a really good classic look that has stood the test of time and will stand the test of time. It's also very lightweight, pretty unobtrusive, looks good on a Leica. Not really a lot to complain about. Now, again, the Sonnar depends on your taste. It's an acquired taste. I love the size and the extra light gathering, but it was one of those things where I just couldn't get past how vintage it looked for my wedding work, but it was pretty fun otherwise. Overall, I really like the lens. There's just some things I wish I could change about it to make me want to consider actually keeping one.
So thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. Thanks again to Zeiss for sending these out for me to play with. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all on the next one.